Panic and paranoia have broken out in the CDU. The latest election polls confirm the very worst for the CDU. The 2030 tipping point is almost here. And when Friedrich Merz said he wanted to halve the AfD, he just wrote it wrong. He actually meant he wanted to halve the CDU. He's almost achieved that goal now. We'll take a look at that today. And if you would support this channel, I'd really appreciate a like and a subscription.
Because in the end, we saw the renewed performance of the play's self-mutilation in front of the firewall.
And that's exactly right. The Greens deliberately voted together with the AfD even when asked about it. Meanwhile, the CDU is still stubbornly holding on to this firewall and is mutilating itself in the process. The latest election polls, I'll show them to you briefly, clearly prove that the tipping point has been reached. Panic and paranoia have broken out. And anyone from the CDU who hasn't noticed it yet will definitely notice it by next week at the latest. There are still no significant tax reforms. And next week, economic growth will have to be revised downward again. We just can't maintain it. This meager 0.3% growth is not going to happen.
And the German Taxpayers Federation, on the other hand, is calling for a cut in subsidies and tax breaks by at least 10%.
The SPD has clearly rejected that. Nothing is going to be rolled back here. While the AfD is still about 5 percentage points behind the entire governing party, according to the latest polls, panic has now broken out. And this happened on a Saturday afternoon. We have a chancellor, and Carsten Lindemann once again stepped up to defend him and said, but we can't rule out this chancellor. Now that he wants to push through some reforms, we see that this person will have dropped even further in the polls by tomorrow at the latest. And he's already almost breaking the 10% approval threshold here. That's never happened before. That makes him the most unpopular politician that has ever existed on this planet. You really have to let that sink in. And that's our chancellor, a second-rate wannabe chancellor.
The previous proposals are not enough. We need to go up to 10%, said Association President Rainer Holznagel to the newspapers of the Mediengruppe Bayern. Union Parliamentary Group leader Spahn had previously advocated for a flat reduction of all subsidies and tax benefits by only 5%. This is also intended to finance the planned tax reform by the CDU-SPD coalition.
And if you can gather that correctly from the press reports, then Lars Klingbeil has made it very clear here that he will not work on this project in that way. He wants to tax the rich. He doesn't see any other options, and certainly not to cut back these subsidies. And that's exactly why he will reject any proposal, including anything above 10%. Even Jens Spahn's 5% proposal was rejected. They want to use the money, not distribute it indiscriminately. Instead, millionaires and billionaires in this country absolutely have to be taxed so heavily that we'll see even more capital flight from Germany. Anything else is no longer possible with the SPD now. The SPD knows that if these subsidies are withdrawn, things will get really bad, even for the SPD. They would then struggle with the 10% threshold, and at the same time, of course, that would give the CDU another boost. And they simply don't want to leave this territory to the other governing party because they've already started fighting for their very survival here. That's what we've already seen in the polls.
Mr. Carsten, to be honest, even as a political observer, it's pretty difficult right now to look optimistically at the political future of the CDU-SPD coalition. And of course, you wonder what's actually going on within this coalition right now.
I think everyone here knows what's happening. The base of the SPD and the base of the CDU are doing everything they can, and I really mean everything, to cut down these governing parties, to cut down their own staff. They are in sheer panic. I don't even want to know what will happen when the next election polls come from Saxony-Anhalt, from Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, and even more importantly, when they come from Bavaria. Because Bavaria is the deciding factor in the election. Because if there is another disaster here for Markus Söder, then the SPD has managed not by its own strength, but almost by sheer luck, to undercut the SPD. And then the SPD has overtaken the CDU, and the CSU fails to clear the 5% threshold because they have left behind pure chaos. They have now offered appointments again for next week. On the one hand, from Katharina Reiche, who is revising the growth rate downward again, maybe to 0.1, maybe with a bit of luck to 0.2%. They have scheduled an appointment for Lars Klingbeil, who then clearly says again that he doesn't have a tax reform yet, and he can't just pull this tax reform out of a hat. And there will probably even be a supplementary budget, because they still can't agree on the budget balance, since too much money is missing and the debt brake is as set in stone as the CDU says. No softening of the debt brake, not at this point. And with that, well, it's basically the end, unless a supplementary budget is created or the funds are misappropriated again. But I think this vote that has now taken place between the Greens and also the AfD was actually another sign of a constitutional violation. And we also vote in the Bundestag.
You notice, basically, this country has been in a political crisis since the traffic light coalition failed. Since then, the population has felt a certain political optimism. A lot of hope was placed in the CDU-SPD coalition, and basically, the CDU-SPD coalition just hasn't delivered yet.
Wait a minute, we all had hope because we were lied to from start to finish. Even I had hope, while so many, and Horst wrote to me again yesterday, a regular viewer of mine. He said, I told you what would happen. And yes, many people were right, namely those who said, no, the CDU and also the SPD just don't fit together at the moment. And there will be even more chaos than if these two parties just kept governing together. And 30% of all voters at the federal level are now being all but excluded. At the same time, the CDU, which isn't even reflected in the polls yet, now already wants to soften the firewall against the left, which is of course an absolute no-go, especially for many CDU voters. So, texts like shoot the rich and wealthy, the CDU still hasn't forgotten that. And many CDU voters haven't forgotten it either. And introducing anti-capitalism here in Germany is an absolute no-go for the CDU, and also something completely new that could emerge. And exactly for this reason, the next election polls next week will bring clarity about whether this chancellor will even continue. That he is now showing such momentum, has picked up speed, and I really have to say, is being destroyed like this. I personally would not have thought that the whole thing would happen so exponentially fast. Therefore, as I said, the panic has set in now, especially in the CDU. They will meet there next week to see if there is even a future left with this chancellor.
Has advised and possibly paved the way for fascism, and behind the firewall the AfD is already whistling and ordering popcorn for the next round, because the next performance of this play is sure to come.
They agreed to good motions, and then it's said that they're supporting fascism. The Greens should have just stayed seated. They should have just stayed seated on their own motion and not voted. And I think, yeah, and I don't know how you all out there see it, but I think with every law that benefits the economy even a little bit, with every law here in Germany that somehow moves people forward, gives hope or something like that, it really doesn't matter who votes on it. And the Greens had the option to just stay seated during the vote on their own proposal, do nothing, and the matter would have been off the table. You can't just stand there and say, yeah, but now the AfD is cheering and they're already ordering new popcorn because they had a say in a good law. That's a fact, yes. Yeah. There were two more additional rounds of voting because the first time no majority could be determined, quote unquote. They voted again and then made it very clear, hey, there is a majority with the Greens and with the BSW. And the BSW had already said beforehand they will support AfD motions if they are good, or also vote with the AfD if the motions are good. And this motion was a good motion. Because it was for the economy.
Who exactly agreed to it as well. The AfD, of course, played their tricks again, but that doesn't matter. Unless you believe in black magic and think that somehow Green voters now find Björn Höcke a bit less dangerous, just because the Greens got a majority for their cause, namely animal welfare, together with the AfD.
For everyone out there who might not follow politics, Björn Höcke is not in Saxony, Mr. Orban is in Saxony, and Mr. Kretschmer is in Saxony. They've already gotten friendly with each other a few times. And the other party that was also involved was the BSW, who also agreed and who actually have the majority in this federal state, where, by the way, a minority government works quite well with the SPD. You can agree on many topics, but you also have to deal with it when the opposition manages to get something through. And why did the AfD actually play tricks with that if they're just agreeing to motions? I don't quite understand that. So yes, the AfD agrees to a motion. Okay, then the AfD is bad. We still vote for it. The AfD doesn't vote for the motion. Yes, the AfD is bad because they don't vote for the motion. The AfD submits a motion, which is categorically rejected because the AfD is bad. And Höcke, he seems to be leading the AfD throughout the entire German federal state. I could really imagine that because that's what I keep hearing again and again from those moronic reporters. But that was actually just a ridiculous statement. If it had been in Thuringia, I might have let it slide. But the Greens would never have voted with the AfD there. Why not, actually?